We are looking at Micah 1, the last half, verses 8 through 16, session number 3 in our series on Micah. We're going to move again to the end of chapter 1, prepared next time to move into chapter 2. Well, recall that Micah's outline includes 3, I'd call them sets or events or whatever we want to call it. Anyhow, 3 sets consisting of 3 subsections each. And those 3 are, first, introducing a summons to listen. Listen to what? Well, listen to the charges that are going to follow. Then there's going to be an oracle, a warning of judgment to come, a woe, if you please, and finally then each section ends with a promise of hope. And of course, whenever God judges his people, he does offer them restitution, depending upon how they respond to his warning, of course. So in each case, each of these 3 cases, the scene is essentially much like a celestial courtroom. Try saying those together quickly. A celestial courtroom in which a charge of idolatry is made, it's explained, and then it's going to be described about how it will come to be. That's generally not something you're looking for, but it will happen. In this section in particular, this first set of 3, Micah presents a bleak picture as he warns of judgment to come and makes the summons to listen. So bleak that Micah offers a lament for the judgment he is about to expose. He's going to get involved himself in the sense of its doom. He sounds quite disturbed and quite down, as we would say nowadays, I suspect. So let's begin with Micah 1, verse 8. Micah says this, because of this, and now we have to go back and think about what this is that was just spoken of previously. Because of this, I must lament and wail. He's talking about himself now. I must go barefoot and naked. That has a whole different set of meanings. I must make a lament like the jackals, who are isolated beings for the most part, and a mourning like the ostriches, another type of bird that is essentially a loner. So he's talking about isolation here. So it sounds like he's almost in tears as he contemplates the traditional mourning and wailing of that region that's going to come from the judgment to be. To go barefoot and naked is to share in utter shame. David, as a matter of fact, once wrote of this experience. I'm reading from 2 Samuel 15, looking at verse 30. And David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, and he wept as he went, and his head was covered, and he walked barefoot. Then all the people who were with him, each covered his head and went up weeping as they went. David didn't say he was being naked, but barefoot implies a good part of that. So David was going up the Mount of Olives, crying in agony, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. And you can go back and read in 2 Samuel 15. You can go back and probably have to drop back to 14 a bit. But in 2 Samuel 14 and 15, you can go find out why David was weeping as he went. Earlier in verse 8, we read, because of this. And that refers to the judgment of which Micah had just spoken earlier. As a matter of fact, let's go and read the two verses before, verses 6 and 7 of chapter 1. For I will make Samaria, the northern kingdom, of course, but in this specific case, he's also going to be talking about the capital, the city of Samaria itself, a fairly sizable city, I understand. So he says, for I will make Samaria a heap of ruins in the open country, planting places for a vineyard. No buildings, no people. It's going to be just like it was a vineyard, isolated, planted, and growing crops, or at least growing the fruit of the vine. And then he says, I will, this is Yahweh's words that Micah is giving out, I will pour her stones down into the valley. And that's not unusual. There was evidently a valley around Samaria, and all the stones from the buildings, when the buildings were torn down, they were going to be rolled into the valley. Same thing that happened with the temple later when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed it. It said that it raised the bottom of the valley there. It raised it several feet, actually. There were so many stones thrown into it as Nebuchadnezzar destroyed all the buildings. So it says, I will pour, this is God speaking again, I will pour her stones down into the valley and will lay bare her foundations. And that's true of the buildings, but it also would be true of the nation and the city itself. Laying bare her foundations means I'm going to expose everything about Samaria. All of her idols will be smashed. Remember, that's the charge that's being made, that she has, the northern kingdom has become idolatrous, too idolatrous for God to tolerate any longer. He has drawn the line in the sand. All of this is continuing in verse 7. All of her earnings will be burned with fire. Now that's strange. What's it talking about? Well, he explains a bit here. And all of her images I will make desolate. So he's going to destroy the idolatrous images that are all over the region. It says then, continuing, for she, that's Samaria, the northern kingdom, collected them, that's the earnings, from a harlot's earnings. In other words, he's speaking about all of the money that was associated with Baal worship. And to the earnings of a harlot they will return. Now, what does that mean? Well, apparently what God is saying here, look, her spiritual harlotry involved money given. It goes back to the fact that there were temple prostitutes, for which men paid. That money went to either Baal and Baal's worship in some sense, or it went to the northern kingdom's government. Only two places for the spiritual harlot's earnings to go. And then he says, and to the earnings of a harlot they will return. Where is all of the wealth of the northern kingdom going to go? Assyria, which is a totally idolatrous nation itself. So the money is going to a different version in Assyria of spiritual harlotry. And so that's what what Lord is saying here again. I'm going to destroy the city. I will destroy the nation, and all her wealth will go to this Gentile idol worship in Samaria. Not Samaria, Assyria. And in jackals and ostriches again, some translations don't have ostriches, they have owls. Doesn't matter. Both birds are sort of isolated instances of birds. They don't flock together. Anyhow, it's a description of how isolated Micah felt as he contemplated the judgment to come. So Micah is saying, I know this is a prophecy of doom. It's a foreboding. It had him in tears, had him undone. But now he's going to shift to the past tense to speak of this doom to come as if it had already happened. That is, he's declaring that this prophecy of doom is something God had decreed. And when God makes a decree, it is going to happen. There is nothing you can do to offset it. It would come to pass. Let's move on now to verse 9. For her, as Samaria's wound, is incurable. That's why it's going to you know for sure it's going to happen. He said there's nothing that can be done to cure the idolatry and behavior of the northern kingdom. For it has even come to Judah. There was no even in there. I read that. It says, for it's come to Judah. It has reached the gate of my people. Where is that? Even to Jerusalem. So he said, the thing that I'm judging the northern kingdom for, the same thing is going on all the way to Jerusalem. Judah is not immune or exempt from anything that's happening. They're doing the same idolatrous things. The judgment against Samaria is not reversible. It will happen. The judgment will be undertaken. But the sin that had overtaken the northern kingdom had so spread cancer-like that the judgment was already knocking at the gates of Jerusalem also. And we know that, 140 years or so, probably about 140 years after the northern kingdom fell to Assyria, Judah was to fall to Babylon. So same kind of thing is coming Judah's way, but there'll be a difference. And we'll talk at times about the difference between the judgment on Assyria and the judgment on Judah. I can tell you right now it's very simple. The judgment on the northern kingdom on Samaria was to destroy the nation as a nation. The northern kingdom, after Assyria took it over and destroyed it, it never again rose to be a functioning nation. There was a reason for that, I think, and that was that the northern kingdom, when they set up the split and their own temples of calf worship, they took themselves out from under the covenant, and they were no longer covered by the covenant. Not as a nation. Some of the individuals, yes, were still faithful. But the nation itself was to be wiped off the face of the map, never to return. That's not true of Judah, because Judah still had the temple, so Judah could still apparently worship God properly in the manner that he indicated. They didn't routinely, but they had it there. They were still under the covenant. And so Judah's judgment was the curses part from Deuteronomy, that what promises God make under the covenant if you did not obey the covenant requirements. But the northern kingdom had taken themselves out from under the covenant, and so their punishment was totally different for a different purpose, essentially for the same kinds of purposes, but in a different manner because they were no longer operating under the covenant. Even apparently, they didn't even make an image of it or an attempt to look like they were worshiping God properly. No, they made substitutes, substitute of the temple, substitute of the priesthood, and on and on and on. So the northern kingdom wrote its own script for total destruction. Judah did not. She underwent tremendous problems and suffering with her discipline after Nebuchadnezzar destroyed her, but she returned after the captivity and was once again a functioning nation, which she still was in Jesus' day. Interestingly, Assyria in 701 BC, this is about 20 years after Samaria fell to the Assyrians, they besieged Jerusalem and was saved only with Yahweh's intervention. How? You may remember that on one night when the Assyrians were besieging Jerusalem, one night, and this is somebody you've heard me talk about many times, Malach Yahweh, the angel of Yahweh, the angel of Jehovah, the angel of the Lord, personally killed 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. One dark night. Hezekiah was king at the time that took place. He was the king in Judah at that time. And when he knew Assyria was on its way and threatening it, as a matter of fact, there's a story of how the leaders of the Assyrian army were even taunting Hezekiah as if Hezekiah's God couldn't do anything because of who they were militarily. Isaiah was Hezekiah's spiritual advisor. He was also the one who helped Hezekiah make decisions, and he was going to be helpful here as well, because that's where Isaiah was able to say, look, Assyria's coming. They will try and take us. They will not be able to take us. They will return to Assyria, and we will remain an independent nation. That's yes and no. They were an independent nation, all right, but they were like a vassal state of Assyria and were paying tribute and so forth. But they were still independent. They had never been destroyed by Assyria. Part of that prophecy said the king is going to turn tail and go back to Assyria. And it's kind of interesting because when the king did decide, no, this ain't worth it, I just lost 185,000 men that night, and I have no idea how it took place, but there were my 185,000 soldiers laying dead. He said, I'm out of here. I'm going back to Assyria. He went back to Assyria only to have his sons murder him. So that was involved a bit in the prophecy of Isaiah, as I remember it. But anyhow, what's coming next in Micah? He's going to shift into a poetic form, and there are going to be a number of plays on the sounds of words. In this case, the names of some of the cities. So those that I know where he was making a play on the name of the city, I'll try to express that. I'm not an expert in that sort of thing, but it is poetry. It is done in a way that a poet would tell a story. And so that's what we're going to look at. These cities are in a central section of Judah, generally to the west and a bit to the south of Jerusalem. So they're right in the smack in the middle of Judah, or Judea, if you prefer to say it that way. So let's look at verse 10. Tell it not in Gath, weep not at all. At Beth Leapra, roll yourself in the dust. Okay, so what's that got to do with anything? Because of the sound of tell and Gath, the two words are Yuagad and Gat. So they sound somewhat alike in Hebrew. I can't make them sound very much alike, I suspect. But we might paraphrase Micah's first expression. Don't negad Gat. Don't tell Gath, which of course you know who Gath is, don't you? You know that it was the home of Goliath, the giant, killed by David. And it said, don't tell them because it'll give them a reason to rejoice. If Gath knows as judgment it's coming on the northern kingdom, these Philistines will have a ball out there dancing and singing, making fun of the northern kingdom. So don't tell them that. But he uses play on words. Don't nagad gat. Okay, I'll leave it at that. But there's another one, though. How to come I don't have anything here on my notes. Betla-Afra means dust. So what is he saying at Betla-Afra? You in the dust? Roll yourself in the dust. Roll yourself in the name of your city. Well, I guess that I'll leave it at that. David went through and made some similar statements at the death of Saul in 2 Samuel 1:20. This is David speaking. Tell it, that's Saul's death, tell it not in Gath. Why? Well, because Saul was the commander of the army, when Goliath was out there challenging him. This kid David comes along and kills the giant. And now he said, don't tell Gat that Saul's dead, because again, they're going to just jump up and down, dance, say, wow, he's gone, he's gone. Proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon. There are 4 or 5 major cities in Philistia, and Gat and Ashkelon are 2 of them. He said, proclaim it not in the streets, in the Philistine city street, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exult. David said, don't give them the pleasure of doing that over the death of Saul. Don't tell them at all. And again, Bet-le-Ophrah, or some say Bet-Ophrah, which is a misspelling of Ophrah's name. That wasn't supposed to be Ophrah's name, by the way. And it means house of dust. So there's a play on the words here. House of dust, roll in your own dust. Micah was on a roll. Let's look at verse 11. Go on your way, inhabitant of Shaphir, in shameful nakedness. The inhabitant of Zaanannim does not escape. The lamentation of Beth-Ezel, get it eventually, he will take from you its support. Well, again, there's these play on words. Shaphir means beautiful, fair, pleasant. And to Shaphir, Micah essentially said, though you're beautiful, shame on you. I don't know what that does for you. I find it curious and interesting. It doesn't do much except to tell me that Micah could rub things in if he wanted to. But what about Zaanannim, which means come out? So what did he say? At the coming attack, come out won't be able to come out. That one's sort of interesting, I guess. Beth-Ezel is something scholars don't know about for sure, but they hold its meaning to be something like this. The Beth-Ezel might mean standing place. And so what he would, if that's true, then it looks like what Micah was saying. Standing place, your standing place will be removed. You won't have a place to stand. The idea seems to be that Beth-Ezel was a town near Jerusalem, and the lamentation implies that their standing will be removed, the city destroyed as God removed their protection. And Micah continues, he's not finished yet. For the inhabitant of Maroth, M-A-R-O-T-H, becomes weak, waiting for good, because a calamity has come down from the Yahweh to the gate of Jerusalem. So he said, this stuff is getting closer and closer to Jerusalem. Merat is a name that means bitter, similar to Meribah in the wilderness wanderings. So was he saying, Merat, bitter, becomes weak, waiting for good? I'm not sure. I don't smile too much over that one, I guess. So, anyhow, citizens of bitter become weak from bitterness as you suffer the judgment of Yahweh. Suffering that extends all the way not just to you, but it extends all the way to the gates of Jerusalem. And it's all Yahweh's doing, as Micah had told us earlier back in verses 3 and 4 of chapter 1. Micah had said the same thing is coming. For behold, Yahweh is coming forth from his place. He will come down and tread on the high places of the earth. The mountains will melt under him. The valleys will be split like wax before the fire, like water poured down a steep place. And then, now let's move to verse 13 back in Micah 1. We'll continue. You think you're going to get out of the play on words, and the answer is sort of, but not exactly. Look at this in Micah 1:13. Harness the chariot to the team of horses. O the inhabitant of Lachish, she was the beginning of sin to the daughter of Zion, because in you were found the rebellious acts of Israel. So here we have the town of Lachish, which was known for its horses. So they said, you hitch up the chariots. What's he saying? You guys are going to scatter like wild steeds, wild horses. You're going to run for your life because judgment is coming your way. Why? Because you were at the forefront of sin among the daughters of Zion, and you were rebellious. So he says, you guys, Lachish sounds like steed, I guess, a bit. So he's saying, you guys, you studs there, you steeds. Well, the male would be the stud, I guess. You studs from Lachish, you're going to be scattered. Take off. You're going to flee like a stampede of wild horses. And then Micah continues with woes to 2 more towns. He's got this whole list going on. Therefore, he says in verse 14, you will give parting gifts on behalf of Moresheth Gath. And Moresheth Gath, remember, is what we suspect Micah's hometown to be. But it's a strange thing. You will give parting gifts on behalf of Moresheth. The houses of Achzib will become a deception to the kings of Israel, the northern kingdom. Here we see what we suspect is Micah's hometown, Moresheth. It seems that it sounds similar to the word for betrothed. I would never have guessed it, but that's what the scholars tell us. And so what's the connection with the judgment? What's this about giving gifts? Well, they say, think of the betrothed bride, where she is given gifts when? As she is separated from her parents and her home. So somehow, this is the idea that you guys are going to lose your home, you're going to move out, you're going to take off, but you're going to be given gifts on the way. I have no idea what that's supposed to mean, but maybe something like citizens of Moresheth were going to flee their home as the town is destroyed. The gifts will go to the Assyrians. That's my assumption. I have no idea if that's true or not. All I know is if you live there, you better get ready to go. It's like in the Northwest when you have a fire, a wildfire, you're given orders about leaving, exiting. And so this is very similar to that, it would appear. But what about akzib? Well, akzib means deception, and it's related to akzab, another Hebrew word for deceit. So, what do we have? Akzib will akzab Israel, or akzib will akzab the leaders of Israel, something like that. I suppose if you're reading and understanding Hebrew, maybe you know more about these things than I certainly do. The word actually relates to a stream that has dried up, what they call a wadi. It's similar to Jesus cursing the fig tree because it offered something it didn't have. That is, by its appearance, it had an offering of something to eat. And when Jesus got there was nothing, so he cursed it. So there may be some connection there about the deceit of akzib. Micah wasn't quite finished, however. Remember, we're going to what? Verse 16? We're only in verse 15. Moreover, this is Yahweh speaking, will bring on you the one who takes possession, O inhabitants of Mareshah, Mareshah. It's not either of the first towns of starting with an M that we've had. I forgot what they were, Morah or something like that, plus Micah's hometown. O inhabitants of Mareshah, the glory of Israel will enter Adullam. You remember what Adullam was? It was a cave in which David hid out in order to keep safe from Saul, who was trying to kill him. The glory of Israel seems to refer to the people, perhaps even to the ruling elite. So what's he saying? Oh, you guys in Mareshah, all of you people are going to go and hide in caves. That seems to be the gist of what he's saying. And remember that when Assyria destroyed the northern kingdom, the people were either exiled or some of them, many of them, I suspect, ran to Judea to get out of the judgment that was coming. So anyhow, the people were taking off and hiding, leaving the towns, getting out of the place, either voluntarily or by exile. Again, Adullam is simply the name of the cave that David hid in while Saul was looking to kill him. So, the connection with Mareshah means something like possessor. So Micah is predicting this. One will possess the possessors, who will flee to caves, as in Adullam. So Mareshah said, I am the possessor of this city. The city says, I possess this area. Micah said, no, you don't. You will be possessed by another, Assyria. And when that happens, you're either going to be exiled or you're going to run scared and hide out in caves. Hosea painted an even bleaker picture of the judgment to come on the northern kingdom. I want to read Hosea 9, verses 11, 12, and 13. And Hosea calls the northern kingdom Ephraim rather than Samaria. Says, as for Ephraim, their glory will fly away like a bird. No birth, no pregnancy, and no conception. Though they bring up their children, yet I will bereave them until not a man is left. Yes, woe to them indeed when I depart from them. Ephraim, as I have seen, is planted in a pleasant meadow like Tyre, but Ephraim will bring out his children for slaughter. So, how close does Micah come to what Hosea is saying? Look at the last verse we'll look at today, the last verse of chapter 1, verse 16. Make yourself bald and cut off your hair, something Jewish men were not to do normally. And then Micah continues to wrap up chapter 1 with these 3 lines of text. Because of the children of your delight, extend your boldness like the eagle, for they, your children of your delight, for they will go from you into exile. So he's saying, you people worried about your kids? Well, you ought to, because they're not going to be your kids anymore. They are going into exile. You may or you may not. The charge is to do something in mourning that was generally prohibited in Israel, as I said, about shaving your head and your beard. Well, look at Leviticus 21:5. They shall not make any baldness on their heads, talking about Israeli men, nor shave off the edges of their beards, nor make any cuts in their flesh. So typically they were not to do these signs of mourning. And in Deuteronomy 14:1, we see much the same. You are the sons of Yahweh your God. You shall not cut yourselves, nor shave your forehead for the sake of the dead. So here again, they're saying, even in mourning, you're not supposed to do it. But yet Micah says you're going to. Micah's claim as to the form of judgment will take, what was it? Your children will be sent into exile away from you. Not a very pretty start to a series of prophecies. Next session, we're going to examine the last segment of this first sermon, a further glimpse of judgment to come, and a promise of hope. The promise of hope may take into a second session. We may not get it all done next time. Pretty confident we won't. So, prophecy of doom, a prophecy that included the destruction of the nation, never to rise again, a prophecy of exile of most of its people to foreign lands, where now they not only can't worship properly, they can't worship even in their golden calf way. They can't worship anyway. They have to worship in some way that they do not know, and some way that has not been approved of the God. So this was a really nasty, for the Israelite, at least it would seem like a very nasty judgment. But remember, God said, you violate the covenant, there will be curses. Cursing everywhere, all time, and period, for everyone. So this was not going to be a pleasant time, but it was an example of Yahweh fulfilling his promises, all the way back to Deuteronomy. So, if you hang in there, we'll come back next time, look at most of the rest of the prophecy of doom, and then we're actually going to look at a couple of things. We're going to see that somewhere along the line, there were men, false prophets, who took one look at Micah and said, "Shut your mouth." So we'll have a section about false prophets as well, and Micah's interaction with them in a bit, at least. It's not going to be the major issue, but the major issue will be, how do we get to something that holds hope for us in the view of this extremely negative judgment, at least from the people's view. It was a negative judgment, even though it was a faithful Yahweh